Are tiny homes an acceptable solution to America's unaffordable housing market? Some regulators want to put those who can't afford to buy or rent a home in the neighborhood close to where they work into a tiny home community as an option to achieve affordable housing. And in this article posted in the Denver Post, they're referring to school teachers and bus drivers across Colorado whose jobs don't pay them enough money to buy or rent a traditional home. So check this out. Instead of paying them more money to teach our children and to bus them around, these thoughtful Colorado districts want to put them in tiny home communities. Wow, so nice of them. Some believe that tiny homes aren't even an appropriate option to deal with the growing homelessness population in states like Washington. As one homelessness authority director in Seattle, Ann Martins, was once quoted in the SeattleTimes.com, it reads, though the CEO of the authority, Mark Downs, said the RHA has no axe to grind with tiny homes as shelter, and Martins, the RHA's senior director of external affairs and communications, wrote to me, meaning the director here, over the weekend, calling them shanty towns. Now, Ann Martins must have been scrutinized for her remarks, as a later SeattleTimes.com article said that the spokesperson later apologized. Now, I'm certain the builders of these tiny homes are salivating and encouraging legislators, and maybe even supporting them financially, to get tiny home communities approved and built everywhere and stat. Now, I wonder if these tiny homes meet the same building and energy codes required for traditional residential housing or backyard sheds. So, no offense to those selecting to live in a tiny home, but is it really an option to solve the unaffordable housing crisis that we're facing in America? If so, it's my opinion that we need to rethink who's in charge for figuring this out. Welcome back to this week's Real Estate Q&A, where I discuss everything real estate, including answering 5 questions or comments from our amazing audience left on our YouTube channel. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to our channel and hit that notification bell to be alerted when we post videos. Now, this video is brought to you by our one and only SachsRealty.com, where you can find qualified real estate professionals near you. Now let's look at this article in the Denver Post and discuss what they're doing for their teachers and bus drivers who are underpaid according to local housing costs of traditional homes. So this article is entitled, "Housing is so expensive in Colorado that school districts are becoming landlords to attract teachers. Home prices outpace wages even as school districts dole out raises. Districts are building tiny homes, becoming landlords, and partnering with developers so that they can find ways to either lease housing to their employees at below market rates or make home ownership possible for workers who otherwise would be priced out of buying a property. We're solving for an issue that is much more systematic," Summit School District Superintendent Tony Bird said. "Frankly, the cost of living versus wages makes it such that if we are going to staff our schools, for many districts, we have to jump in and do it." I'm sorry, guys, but what the hell are we doing here? I mean, does anyone else see something wrong with this solution? What have we allowed to have happen with home affordability in America? I mean, let's take a look at some of these tiny homes. Now, look at this picture. Okay, I admit this tiny home is very cute and may be a solution for many who need a safe roof over their heads, as well as a great option for short-term rentals and those visiting an area for vacation. But can you imagine the divide between the rich and everyone else if this is America's solution to solve our affordable housing crisis? If these school districts know very well, despite paying teachers a salary increase, it still isn't enough for them to buy or rent a traditional home in an area where they work. In my opinion, there's something very broken here. Look at this AI-generated example of inside this tiny home. How can anyone live permanently in a tiny home in a space less than 500 square feet? I mean, I guess you could raise a family in one of these, but to me, it's not a very viable solution. Now, Yahoo Finance on May 12th of 2023 published an article titled, "Are Tiny Homes Worth It? 21 Reasons Why They're a Huge Mistake." So let's just take a look at a couple of these reasons. Tiny homes are expensive. The average 2,600 square foot home cost about $190 a square foot to build. Whereas this company called Tumbleweed, who builds tiny houses, and by the way, they're one of the best known tiny house builders in America, cost about $326 per square foot to build. And to this point, houses, even tiny ones, must be built to code. Tiny homes built on foundations typically must meet the same code requirements as any other traditional house. But the cost might be disproportionate and even prohibitive if you're working a bare bones budget. You might have to prepare the land for construction, pull permits, order inspections, and pay to bring utility services onto the site. Or how about this? There's no space to expand your family. A tiny home that works for individuals might not work for couples. And what works for a couple might not accommodate a baby and the supplies that come along with having one. Even bringing a pet into the mix can overcrowd your tiny home. Then there's this. It's a tough lifestyle. Tiny living takes a lot of work. You'll have to go grocery shopping more often, pick up mail from the post office box, and do frequent small loads of laundry in a compact machine. You might also have to empty out a composting toilet, climb in and out of a sleeping loft, and grapple with multifunctional furniture that needs to be opened and closed or folded and unfolded every time you use it. So here's the deal. If you're going to buy a tiny home or rent one, plan on not buying in bulk to save money on actual supplies, food and supplies, and be prepared to take many trips to the store. Maybe you need to make sure you have enough electric supply going to your tiny house to charge your EV so these additional trips to the store don't break the gas budget. And finally, the cramped space wears on your mental health. An overcrowded home has been linked to increased stress and anxiety in families, likely due to the lack of privacy and disrupted sleep. Children might also find it difficult to locate a quiet place to read or complete schoolwork in such close quarters. And that's exactly what we don't need for those who teach our children, Denver, or any others who feel that this is a great idea to handle the housing affordability crisis in America. So now for this week's comments and questions. And by the way, please don't forget, before you go, drop your comments below about this potential tiny home movement across the U.S. What do you have to say about it? Okay, so our first comment has something to do with what we're talking about here. These tiny homes and, trying to figure out, what's the best way to address the housing affordability issue. So, apparently this first commenter has been maybe homeless at one point in time. They said, losing a loved one is emotional, mentally, and spiritual, but losing a home is financially and emotionally and mentally. Well, they say, unless you've ever been homeless, you wouldn't understand. And guys, this is kind of what we're talking about here, right? We need to address the housing affordability issue in our country. The answer is to not stick people in substandard houses or build shanty towns like we had back in the Great Depression. The idea here is, how do we fix this without, just dividing the rich from everyone else? And so I guess this is something that the next president, whoever it is, whether it's the existing administration or not, needs to really address, and really through HUD. And the Secretary of HUD has to really try and figure something out here where I believe we need to actually cut red tape and encourage builders to build more affordable housing. And it's going to take reducing the cost, cutting red tape to do so, because it's so expensive for developers to take a plot of land and actually turn it into a home subdivision. And this is one of the reasons why they're building McMansions, because it doesn't make sense. There's no profit otherwise. So I think we need to not put houses on wheels and expect that to be the answer to our solution, or even these tiny houses where someone has nothing basically to, build themselves, a family, or, establish themselves in the community. I mean, can you imagine? What are you going to say to people like, oh, I live in the tiny home community down the street? Again, for those, I'm not trying to insult those that may live in a tiny home or they're desiring to do so. I just don't think that is going to be an answer to solve America's housing issue. And on this CNN.com, an article read, home affordability is worst it's been since 1984. So what is affordable? So housing policymakers typically go by the standard threshold that anyone paying over 30% of household income, that home is, for a house, that home is unaffordable. Guys, I can tell you right now, we are seeing states that are, in order to buy a house, for the median income to the median home price, it's like 8 times. So it's not 3 times or even 4 times someone's median salary, household salary to buy a home. It's 8 times, 9 times their median household salary. And that's what Denver's dealing with here in the problem where they build these schools, they invite these people to come and live in the community, but they don't pay them enough money to actually be a part of the community or work where they live. So are we going to stick them in a tiny house? Or are we going to come up with a better solution? Now, so that I'm not isolating, whether you're Republican or Democrat, or whether you watch CNN or watch Fox. If you prefer Fox, then there's this article. Homes are now unaffordable in 99% of the U.S. for the average Americans. Housing affordability hits the lowest point since 2007, and that's according to a new report published by real estate data provider Adam, which examined 572 U.S. counties and determined that median home prices in 99% of those areas were out of reach for the average income earner, who makes about $71,214 annually. Or how about this? The number of homeless people in America grew in 2023 as high cost of living took a toll. Homelessness shot up by more than 12% this year, reaching 653,104 people. The numbers represent the sharpest increase and largest unhoused population since the federal government began tallying totals in 2007. Guys, we need something to be done about the housing affordability, and we need it ASAP. Cost and affordability should be getting better with technology, not worse. It's an issue nationwide. We need, as the industry, to acknowledge the fact that housing is unaffordable and that we do have an unaffordability crisis at our hands. And, we need to start looking at a solution here. And the solution is not to just say, oh, well, home prices are just going to continue to go up. When the interest rates drop, they're going to continue to go up. It's not going to happen. It's madness. It can't happen, at least with some type of correction. The correction has to be either people make more money or prices come down. And we're looking at Denver. The Denver School Board is acknowledging the fact that their teachers and their bus drivers can't live in the community. They're going to build them tiny homes, for crying out loud. I mean, guys, think about this, right? Now, for you buyers out there, our next comment reads, there are multi-generations living under the same roof to afford the high cost of owning a property. So let's check this out. According to 2020 U.S. Census data, and you can find that on census.gov, 7.2% in 2020 of U.S. family households were multi-generational. This represents approximately 6 million households and was up 900,000 households almost 18% from the 2010 data. And guys, I don't know about you, whether you fill out that census information. I personally believe that this number is lower than what it actually is. I think that there are a lot of people that they just don't fill it out. And so look at this chart representing percentages of multi-generational households per county. The dark blue represents 7.15 to 30.95% of the percentage of multi-generational to overall percentage of family households. So you can see that there's a big correlation here in the dark blue areas to some of the nation's least affordable housing. And we know for a fact that I think it was 2021, millions of millennials packed their bags from the apartments that they couldn't afford to live in and moved back home with mom and dad. Millions, guys, millions of millennials. And I can personally tell you that out of the last probably 4 or 5 houses that I've been involved with, they're multi-generational also. They were moving in, they bought the house to move mom in or dad in or, combine their family because the affordability just isn't there. And I actually work in one of probably the most affluent areas in the nation. I think here in Maryland, our DMV, DC, Virginia, Maryland district is some of the top paying jobs, highest earners in the nation. And we're still seeing this affordability crisis. So our next commenter says, I find it truly pathetic that some economists, and even more so the pathetic media sources, put forth the argument that the economy is going swimmingly and don't believe your lying eyes or empty wallet. Why can't people just provide people the truth? Thank you for providing the truth. It's true, Anthony, about empty wallets. Check out this Fred chart published by the Fed from data collected from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis. Want to know why people can't afford housing? In the notes, it says this chart represents personal saving is equal to personal income less personal outlays and personal taxes. It may generally be viewed as a portion of personal income that is used to either provide funds to capital markets or to invest in real assets such as residences. Now look at this chart. With the exception of the great financial crisis in 2008 to 2010, we haven't seen percentages of personal disposable income this low in the United States, guys, dating back to January of 1959. All right, so our next commenter, and I tell you what, we're gonna get deep into this one because this got me so much fire from other agents in the industry. I know they're agents just by the response to when I mentioned this in one of our Tuesday night podcasts. And the issue was, how do you qualify an agent? And a loan officer had originally commented something that said, hey, you should ask the agent that's helping you, when you're interviewing for hiring an agent to buy a home, that you should be able to ask the agent or should ask the agent if they own a home. And, that it's important to know, about their financial stability, because when someone's representing you in a commission environment, there's the thought that if they are desperate for money, that they may not put their client's needs first over a commission check. Valid point. And I'd agree with that. I said, I think it's a valid qualifying question. Not to determine whether you should hire the agent or not, but if I were looking for a house, not being in the real estate industry, just being, astute and making sure that I'm asking the right questions, I would certainly ask somebody that's going to help me buy a $700,000 house or $400,000 house, whatever the cost. Do you own a home? Just like I had referenced in the live show, if I'm going into a Mercedes dealer and the guy's telling me the Mercedes is the best car to have, I might say, do you drive a Mercedes? If he drives a Honda, I might say, well, why don't you drive a Mercedes? And then somebody chimed in the comments and said, well, I was stupid, basically, that, if people could afford to buy a Mercedes-Benz, they wouldn't work at a Mercedes-Benz dealership. And I commented back and said, well, why would they have to buy a new one? I know plenty of people that have Mercedes-Benz because they love the car, they believe in it, and they drive a used one. So I think it's valid to ask a Mercedes salesman if he drives one. And I think it's very reasonable to ask a realtor if they own a home. Now, I get it. Everybody starts out somewhere. But hey, at least that could be a qualifying question that may tell you as a home buyer, if they don't own a home, why not? Maybe they're just young and they're just starting their career and they can't afford it, which is fine. You may still use them anyway, but wouldn't it change the way that you take the things that they say? You might take it at face value or with a grain of salt and do your own research, which you should be doing anyway. So this commenter says, I have to say that this was a great episode, referring to the live show. And Todd, you're spot on about wanting to know about a realtor's finances. And this person says, I've said the same thing about people that you use as financial advisors. What's the advisor's net worth? Now, guys, think about this. You're buying a home. It's a big decision, especially if you're a first-time buyer. You may want somebody that helps you, that actually owns a house, that can tell you what home ownership is all about. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just want to use your best friend, which is up to you. But same thing with a financial advisor. You get a lot of these people that say they're a life coach, a business coach, and they're like 23 years old and they've never been in business. Let's use our heads, guys. If we're going to be hiring people, let's step up the questions and ask them questions about what their qualifications are in order to help you to make large financial decisions. Hey, I'm not saying don't use an agent that doesn't own a home, but it's up to you to decide. So let's move right along. Our next commenter says, Todd, I 100% agree with you about starter homes. So this is a good comment. I also grew up in the 1970s, 80s within the walls of a 1,400 square foot home that housed 6 kids and have 2 parents. 3 kids had to share a room. It made us closer. And this really gets down to, in my industry, I think coined this. They had to have. If the agents didn't coin it, maybe the builders of this McMansion movement did. But I think one of the most aggravating things for me is that when people say, well, let's just get you a starter home, or, this is a move up home, like what you were in was inadequate or substandard. And I think that this is part of our society that we need to get away from and get back to. It would be totally fine, in my opinion, that for any of these builders that can't sell their overpriced, extremely large boxes, McMansions, and mow them down if you can't sell them. Let's just get rid of them and let's build houses that we can afford. Let's build houses that are 1,400 square feet, 1,600 square foot. Let's make that not just a starter home, but a home that you can live in, do whatever you want, whether you decide to raise a family or not. Have a plot of land, build a garden, take part in the community that you live in. Why are we constantly pressuring people that what you're buying today isn't enough, but it's enough for now? And maybe if you keep killing yourself by working day and night and 3 jobs, that maybe one day you can be in debt to a home that's 3 times the size that very quickly you will at one point not need when your kids move out. This is certainly where I think the housing in the U.S. went off the rails. And I found this great website, by the way. It's called populationeducation.org. We're going to take a look at this chart here. They have a great illustration showing the household size along with household population dating back to 1790. That's right. You heard it right. 1790. And basically it's showing how the average home sizes have nearly tripled through the years with less and less home occupants. Now look at this, 1790, 831 square feet was the average household. And there was, you look at this chart, they're taking averages. We don't really have 2/3 of a person, but really you're looking at almost 6 occupants sharing this 831 square foot home. Through the years we get to today, well, this stops at 2019, but actually we're pretty close to this now. 2,496 square foot house, right? Today, on average, that's housing about 2.5 people. Again, we know people aren't in halves, but when we take averages, let's just say 3 people. Big difference. This is why, one of the reasons why we're in this situation. All right, so now looking at this chart, now I get it, guys. We've got some forces working against us here, right? Utility companies, insurance companies, and, well, the municipalities, our own municipalities collecting property taxes, they all make more money on larger homes. So I guess they love this increase in home size. Why we work our fingers to the bone, working 2 and 3 jobs, like I said before, to pay for our roof over our heads. Now, who knows? I mean, maybe building bigger homes have been encouraged through the years from those in charge to add more consumer spending to GDP. Well, lastly, our commenter says, guys, I think you're wrong about credit cards. Now, this is where we're talking about tons of debt. We've got student debt off the rails. We have automotive debt off the rails. In fact, automotive delinquencies off the rails. More repossessions needed than they have repo guys. They have all these parking lots that they've bought or rented to store these repoed cars. But this commenter saying that I'm wrong. People are using credit cards, but they pay the ending balance at full amount. They say that they pay to save on checks, paper checks, and to accrue points. Yes, use of credit cards are high, but people are not in debt and are actually saving money. Well, in this article published a couple of months ago, highlights just how bad the credit card debt crisis really is. It says on bankrate.com, more consumers, 47%, are carrying credit card debt from month to month. Of those carrying balances, 60% have also been rolling them over for longer than a year in today's high rate environment, compared to 50% in September of 2021, when interest rates were at 0%. Now, unexpected or emergency expenses are the main reason for carrying credit card debt, with 43% citing this cause. Now, at a time when the average credit card interest in America, guys, is about 20%, this is very upsetting news. So anyway, there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you got a little nugget or just enjoyed today's video, you can let me know that you did by smashing that thumbs up. You can also subscribe if you haven't and hit that alert bell. You'll know every time that we upload content. And guys, one of the best things that you can do, keep the comments rolling. I love to read them. I don't always get the answer, but I read them, almost all of them. And you never know, your next comment or question may be on next week's Real Estate Q&A. And don't keep this all to yourself, guys. Share it with your friends. We're just so fortunate and so grateful that we have such an amazing audience of now over 80,000 subscribers. So we'll keep that going in 24. God bless you. See you next time.
Sachs Realty, Maryland broker number 607720, office number 443-318-4514, equal housing opportunity.